The Whitmore estate stood majestically on the hill, its neoclassical architecture gleaming under the late afternoon sun. It was a symbol of old money, a dynasty built on real estate empires and political connections. The mansion, now hosting the wedding of the century, had seen its fair share of secrets hidden behind its marble columns and luxurious halls. But none of that history could prepare the guests for what was about to unfold. As guests mingled, laughing and clinking champagne glasses, a figure appeared at the grand entrance, uninvited, unannounced, yet undeniably present. Amara Daniels, a woman of color, stepped into the midst of the opulence with a quiet determination that commanded attention. Her entrance was not one of grace, but of purpose. She had no time for pleasantries. This was not the scene for weddings and celebrations. It was the moment when the past would finally meet its reckoning. She had come for one thing: truth. With every step she took, whispers began to spread. Who was she? What was her purpose here? The gleam in her eyes answered those questions more powerfully than any words could. The time for silence was over, and in that charged silence, she spoke. Rebecca Whitmore isn't who you think she is. She destroyed my family, and many others. Amara's voice cut through the chatter, pulling the room into a sudden stillness. The words hung in the air, shattering the perfect illusion of this wedding. The tension was thick, the truth unbearable. The truth was not just a whisper in the corners of the room, but a challenge to everything the Whitmore name had ever represented. Amara didn't care about the shock in the faces around her. She cared only about the fight for justice. The game had changed. The truth was no longer something that could be hidden. Everyone in the room would have to choose. Would they continue to turn a blind eye, or would they stand and face the darkness that had been covered in layers of wealth and power? And so it begins. The Whitmore estate perched high on a hill in Virginia, its grandeur illuminated by the setting sun. Guests in tuxedos and gowns mingled on the sprawling grounds, where the scent of fresh roses mingled with the hum of laughter and jazz music. The mansion, with its towering marble columns and vast gardens, was a fitting backdrop for a wedding that had been called the event of the century. Gregory Whitmore stood at the altar, his tall frame a picture of polished elegance. At just 28, he was already the heir to one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the country. The air around him was thick with expectations, the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on his shoulders like an invisible cloak. He looked out at the crowd, a sea of powerful people, business tycoons, politicians, and artists, all gathered to witness his union with Rebecca Delaney, the woman he had chosen to marry. Rebecca stood beside him, radiating perfection in a stunning white gown. Her blonde hair cascaded like silk, and her piercing blue eyes never left Gregory's. Everything about her seemed flawless, too flawless, as though she were a statue carved to look perfect. But beneath her beauty, there was something cold, something calculated. Gregory had always sensed it, though he had never been able to put his finger on it. As the ceremony continued, Gregory's thoughts drifted. He had always been the perfect son, the heir who would carry the Whitmore legacy into the future. But there was a part of him that wondered if the legacy he was inheriting was one he could truly be proud of. As the vows began, he could feel an unease settling deep within him. Was this really what he wanted? To continue living in the shadow of his family's empire? Or was there something more? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crash. The grand doors of the hall were flung open, and all eyes turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed simply in a green dress, her hair tied back in an orderly manner. Yet there was something powerful in the way she held herself. Amara Daniels. The guests went silent, their gazes fixed on her. Her entrance was unexpected, her presence undeniable. And as she stepped forward, Amara's voice sliced through the air. "Gregory Whitmore, don't marry her. Rebecca isn't who you think she is. She destroyed my family and so many others." The words hung in the air, like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. The entire room froze, and for a moment, the wedding, a symbol of wealth, beauty, and success, felt like it was standing on the precipice of something far darker. Amara's accusation lingered in the room like a cloud, and everyone in the hall, from the richest socialites to the most powerful businessmen, could feel the shift in the air. Gregory's gaze locked with hers, confusion swirling in his chest. Who was this woman? Why was she here? And why did her words feel like they had the power to change everything? Rebecca, standing beside him, tightened her grip on her bouquet, her smile faltering ever so slightly, though she quickly masked it with a cold glare. Amara continued, her voice unwavering, as she stepped closer to the stage. "I'm not here to beg for your forgiveness, Gregory. I'm here to make sure you know the truth. Rebecca is a liar, and she is responsible for the destruction of my mother's life. And she's not the only one. Your father was involved too." The room erupted in murmurs, some guests looking around for answers, others too stunned to speak. The impact of Amara's words was undeniable. She had come here to destroy the perfect image of the Whitmore family. But was it the truth, or just a desperate plea for attention? Gregory's heart raced as he looked at Rebecca. He wanted to believe her, to continue on with the life he had always known. But the more he looked at Amara, the more he realized that something in her eyes, something deep and knowing, was telling the truth. The tension in the room was unbearable. Gregory could feel the weight of his family's legacy, but he was beginning to wonder, was this the kind of legacy he wanted to carry forward? Rebecca stepped forward, her voice sharp and controlled. "Don't listen to her, Gregory. This is nothing but a distraction, an attempt to ruin everything we've worked for. Amara Daniels is just looking for attention. She has nothing to back up her claims." But Amara was unfazed. "I have proof," she declared, holding up an old silver necklace, its tarnished surface catching the light. "This belonged to my mother. She worked for Rebecca's family, and she lost everything, her dignity, her job, and her life, because of her." The room fell deathly silent again, as Amara's words hung in the air. The necklace, the documents, the accusations. Could they be true? Gregory's stomach twisted as the realization began to settle in. This wedding was no longer just about love and commitment. It was now about something much larger: truth, betrayal, and the sins of the past that could no longer be ignored. As the whispers began to grow louder, Gregory felt himself torn between Rebecca, the woman he loved, and the truth that was unfolding before his eyes. Could he face the truth, no matter how painful it might be? And would he have the courage to stand up to the empire his family had built on the backs of others? The ballroom was still buzzing with the aftermath of Amara's accusations, the whispers growing louder, the murmurs shifting like a slow-moving storm. Gregory stood at the altar, his mind racing. The words Amara had spoken to him kept echoing in his head, loud and clear. "She destroyed my family, and so many others." His gaze shifted to Rebecca, who stood beside him, her face a mask of control. But he could see the slight twitch in her eye, a brief flicker of fear she quickly concealed. Gregory had always known that there were whispers surrounding his family, secrets that people in the know chose to ignore. But this was something different. This was Amara Daniels, a woman whose voice was unwavering and filled with purpose, a woman whose anger seemed justified, and her words had struck too close to home, too deeply. The Whitmore Empire was built on land, wealth, and power, but beneath that, There had always been the shadow of something darker, something he had been too naive to see. Rebecca's grip on his arm tightened, pulling him out of his thoughts. He looked at her, forcing a smile. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a smile that felt hollow, like a broken promise. "Gregory, don't let her get to you," Rebecca whispered, her voice as smooth and convincing as ever. "She's a nobody, just a bitter woman looking for attention." But Amara's accusation hung in the air, and despite Rebecca's words, it wouldn't let go. The truth, if there was any in Amara's claims, had to come from somewhere. He had spent his entire life within the confines of the Whitmore family legacy, taught to uphold its power, its glory. His father had drilled the importance of family into him. Always protect the empire. Always keep the secrets. Gregory had accepted it all, never questioning it. Until now. "Excuse me," he murmured to Rebecca, his voice tight. "I need a moment." Without waiting for her response, Gregory turned and walked out of the ballroom. His mind was clouded, his heart heavy with confusion and doubt. He stepped outside onto the grand terrace that overlooked the estate grounds. The night air was cool, a gentle breeze ruffling his suit. He leaned against the stone railing, staring out into the dark horizon, his thoughts a whirlwind of unanswered questions. How much of what Amara said was true? And why had it taken so long for someone to speak out? He hadn't known Amara, not until today, but her presence felt undeniable. There was a fire in her, something deep and powerful, and he couldn't ignore it. He could sense that this was a pivotal moment in his life, a moment that would force him to confront everything he had been taught to believe, everything he had been taught to protect. "Gregory?" He turned at the sound of the familiar voice. His cousin, Nathan Whitmore, stood behind him, his face lined with concern. Nathan was one of the few people in the family who had always felt different. He had no interest in the business or the empire they were supposed to inherit. Instead, Nathan had opted for a quieter life, working in environmental advocacy and community outreach. It was the kind of work Gregory respected, but never fully understood. Nathan had always been an outsider in the Whitmore world, someone who had chosen a path of purpose over privilege. "I saw her too," Nathan continued, his tone quiet but urgent. "Amara Daniels. She's not just some random woman. She's got a history with your family." Gregory sighed and rubbed a hand over his face, still grappling with the flood of emotions swirling inside him. "I know. But what am I supposed to do with that? What am I supposed to believe?" Nathan stepped closer, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "You don't have to believe everything she says, Gregory. But you do owe it to yourself and to your family to find out the truth. The Whitmore legacy isn't what you think it is. It's not all glitter and gold. There's a darkness in it, and you can't keep ignoring it." Gregory's heart sank. The words hit harder than he expected. He had always been aware on some level that the Whitmore fortune was built on more than just hard work. But he had never imagined that it was tied to something so ugly, something so manipulative. He had to admit, Nathan was right. For the first time in his life, he was questioning everything. The family he had worked so hard to protect, the empire that had been built on the backs of others. "I don't know how to fix it, Nathan," Gregory admitted. "I don't know if I can." Nathan placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice firm. "It's not about fixing it. It's about owning it. You can't change the past, but you can change what happens next. And that starts with facing the truth." Gregory was quiet for a moment, his thoughts racing. The weight of the Whitmore name, of the legacy his father had left behind, had always seemed like an honor, a duty. But now, it felt like a chain wrapped tightly around his chest, squeezing the air from his lungs. "What's your plan?" Nathan asked, his voice breaking the silence. Gregory looked back at the estate, his gaze lingering on the gleaming walls and manicured gardens. It was hard to imagine anything other than wealth and power when staring at the grandiose estate. Yet the seeds of doubt had already been planted. "I'm going to find out the truth," he said quietly, though his voice carried a weight that surprised even him. "I don't know where it'll lead me, but I can't pretend anymore." Nathan nodded, his face softening. "That's a start, Gregory. And once you know the truth, you'll have to make a choice. You can either walk away, or you can do something about it." Gregory didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. The enormity of what he was facing was too much to grasp. He had grown up in this world, had built his life around it. How could he turn his back on everything? And yet, how could he continue to stand by and let others suffer for the sins of his family? But the questions had been asked, and there was no going back. Amara Daniels had shattered the image of perfection, and now it was up to Gregory to decide how much of the truth he was willing to face, and what kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. The morning after the wedding disruption, the estate was still reeling. The opulent ballroom, once filled with laughter and music, now stood eerily silent. Gregory couldn't shake the image of Amara's face, her eyes burning with purpose, her voice unwavering, as she revealed the hidden truths of the Whitmore family. He could hear her words replaying in his mind, each sentence a blade carving through the fabric of his reality. "She destroyed my family, and so many others." Those words echoed through his thoughts as he stood at the window of his study, staring out at the sprawling estate that had been his life's work. The morning sunlight spilled over the manicured lawns, but it did little to soften the heavy weight in his chest. How could he have never known? How could he have spent so many years blind to the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of his family's fortune? His father had always told him that business was business, that success required sacrifice, that nothing worth having came without a price. But this felt different. This wasn't just a matter of ruthless deals or power struggles. This was a betrayal that stretched beyond the confines of the Whitmore family and reached into the lives of people like Amara Daniels, whose world had been destroyed by the greed and exploitation that had built his family's empire. As Gregory stood there, lost in thought, his mind kept returning to one question. What did he truly know about his family's history? What secrets had been buried for so long that even he, the heir to the fortune, had never been privy to them? Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," Gregory called, his voice strained. The door opened, and in walked Nathan, his cousin, his face lined with concern. Nathan had always been a voice of reason in the family, but today his expression was darker than usual. "You're still here," Nathan said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "You should be resting, Gregory. The wedding, it was a lot for everyone." Gregory didn't turn around to face Nathan. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the estate outside. "I can't rest, Nathan. Not after what happened, after what Amara said." Nathan sighed, moving closer to the desk. "I know. I heard. And I'm sure you have a million questions, but you're not going to find the answers by sitting here." Gregory's chest tightened, the weight of his thoughts pushing him to the brink. "I don't even know where to start, Nathan. I don't know what's real anymore. My whole life, I've been taught that the Whitmore name is something to be proud of, that we built something great. But now, I'm not sure what we built at all." Nathan's gaze softened as he crossed the room and sat down in the chair opposite Gregory. "I know it's hard. It's hard to confront the truth, especially when it shatters everything you've believed in. But you need to understand something. The truth doesn't change just because you don't want to face it. Gregory clenched his jaw, feeling the familiar frustration bubbling up inside him. And what if the truth is more than I can handle? What if it's something I can't fix? Nathan paused, letting the silence hang for a moment. Maybe you can't fix it, but you can change what happens next. You can decide who you want to be in this story. Gregory finally turned to look at Nathan, his eyes dark with uncertainty. And what if I'm already too far gone? What if there's no way out? Nathan met his gaze, his voice firm. There's always a way out, but you have to be willing to take it. For a moment, Gregory was silent, his mind racing. The truth Amara had uncovered was only the beginning. There were still so many pieces to the puzzle, so many unanswered questions. If he wanted to know the truth about his family, about Rebecca, about his father's legacy, he would have to dig deeper. He would have to uncover the secrets that had been hidden for years. Where do I start? Gregory asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathan leaned forward, his eyes serious. You start with the past. You need to find out what happened, why Amara's family is connected to yours, why she's so angry. And you need to do it quickly. People like Rebecca, people who have spent their whole lives hiding the truth, will stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Gregory nodded slowly, his mind already working through the logistics of what needed to be done. He had to get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. But where to begin? What piece of the puzzle would lead him to the answers he needed? Without saying another word, Gregory stood up and walked over to a large wooden cabinet against the wall. He opened it, revealing a collection of old family records, documents, letters, photographs, things his father had kept locked away. The Whitmore legacy, in all its glory and shame, was stored in these boxes. Gregory had never thought to look through them before. They had always been off limits, seen as mere relics of a bygone era. But now, they were his only hope. As Gregory began sifting through the papers, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Each document, each letter, each photograph was a thread in the tapestry of his family's past. And with every passing second, he could feel the threads unraveling, revealing the truth behind the Whitmore fortune. The first letter he pulled out was an old correspondence from his father, dated 25 years ago. The handwriting was familiar, but the words on the page were far from comforting. We've done what needed to be done. There's no turning back now. The Whitmore legacy will stand, no matter the cost. But sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Gregory's stomach churned as he read the words. This was the first clue, the first crack in the armor. His father had known something he hadn't shared with Gregory. He turned the page, his hands trembling. And then, he saw it. A photograph of a woman, Amara's mother, he realized instantly, standing in front of a rundown house, looking battered and broken. The house was familiar too. It was one of the properties the Whitmore family had seized years ago in a questionable land deal. This was it. This was where it all started. Gregory knew in that moment that he had found the key to everything. The Whitmore fortune hadn't been built on hard work alone. It had been built on the backs of people like Amara's family. And if he wanted to make things right, he had to confront that truth head on. But the road ahead would not be easy. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous it would become. Rebecca would not go down without a fight, and neither would the rest of the Whitmore family. As he closed the file, a sense of resolve settled over him. The game had changed, and Gregory Whitmore was no longer just an heir to a fortune. He was now a man on a mission to tear down the empire his family had built. brick by brick, until the truth was exposed for all to see. The air in Gregory's study felt thick with the weight of his discoveries. Each file, each letter, each photograph seemed to peel back the layers of his family's empire, exposing the foundation it had been built upon, one that was more fragile than he had ever realized. His hands shook slightly as he placed the last of the documents back in the cabinet, the words of his father still echoing in his mind. "There's no turning back now." Gregory knew this was no longer just a matter of family business. This was personal. The Whitmore name, the fortune, the legacy, these were all things that had been passed down to him, things he had worked his whole life to preserve. But now, that legacy was being threatened, not by some outside force, but by the very people who had created it. His father's words haunted him. The Whitmore legacy will stand, no matter the cost. He was standing at the precipice of something much bigger than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about Amara anymore. This was about the families that had been crushed by his family's unchecked power, the communities left in ruin, the lives that had been sacrificed for the sake of wealth and influence. And as much as Gregory wanted to deny it, he knew that he was a part of it. His inheritance, his success, had been built on the suffering of others. But there was no time to wallow in guilt. He had to act, and he had to act fast. The next few days were a blur of frantic research, quiet meetings with his cousin Nathan, and deep conversations with Amara. She had agreed to meet with him privately, but only after he had gathered enough evidence to prove that he wasn't simply trying to protect his family. He had to show her that he was willing to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. But Amara wasn't easily swayed. She had been fighting this battle for years, and she wasn't going to trust Gregory just because he said he was on her side. Gregory knew that. He had seen the way she held herself, proud, defiant, unyielding. She wasn't looking for redemption. She was looking for justice. The night before their meeting, Gregory sat alone in his study, reviewing the files once again. As the clock ticked past midnight, the flickering candlelight cast shadows on the walls, adding to the oppressive feeling that hung in the room. Every word he read, every piece of evidence he uncovered, made it harder to deny the truth. His father had been a man of power and influence, but he had been a man who would do anything to protect that power, even if it meant betraying the very people who had helped build his empire. The land deals, the shady business practices, the families ruined in the name of progress. Gregory's father had orchestrated it all, and Rebecca Whitmore, his stepmother, had played a central role in it all. Gregory couldn't help but wonder how much of this his mother had known. She had passed away when Gregory was young, but he remembered the sadness in her eyes whenever the topic of the Whitmore family came up. She had always been the one to caution him about the dangers of power, of wealth, of ambition. As Gregory closed the file and leaned back in his chair, he found himself asking the same question over and over again. How did it all go so wrong? The answer, he knew, lay in the past, in the choices made by those who had come before him. But he was determined to find out. He had to. For his own sake, for Amara's, and for the sake of the countless others who had suffered because of his family's greed. The next morning, he met Amara in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. The place was half empty, the soft hum of conversation providing a sense of privacy as they sat across from one another. Amara was dressed in a simple, yet elegant outfit. She had always carried herself with an air of quiet dignity, even in the face of adversity. "I've been gathering information," Gregory began, his voice low and careful. "And I have to say I'm starting to understand. I didn't know what I was really inheriting. I didn't know what my father, what Rebecca, had done." Amara's expression was unreadable as she sipped her coffee. She didn't say anything at first, letting the silence linger between them. Gregory's words had to sink in. He could see the skepticism in her eyes, the mistrust that had been building for years. She wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. "I know you don't trust me," Gregory continued, his tone genuine. "But I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to trust the truth. I'm asking you to trust what we can do with that truth. We can't undo what's been done, but we can expose it. We can make it right." Amara placed her cup down, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And what do you expect me to do with this truth you've found? You think I'm just going to let you off the hook because you've had a change of heart?" "No," Gregory replied, his voice firm. "But I think you'll see that I'm not the enemy here. Rebecca is. My father is. They're the ones who built this empire on the backs of people like you, on the backs of families like yours." Amara looked at him for a long moment, her gaze piercing. She seemed to be weighing his words carefully, as if searching for any sign of deceit. Finally, she spoke. "I've heard this all before," she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "The promises, the apologies, the empty words. But nothing changes Gregory. You think that because you found a few documents and a couple of old letters, that suddenly everything is going to be fixed, that suddenly people are going to forgive you. And your family?" Gregory flinched at the bitterness in her tone. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't been prepared for this level of anger. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance to make it right. And I'm asking for your help." Amara was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "You want to make it right?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then prove it. Show me that you're willing to do whatever it takes. Show me that you're not just another rich kid playing at redemption." Gregory's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. "I'll do whatever it takes," he promised. "I'll expose them. I'll take down Rebecca. Take down the whole damn empire. And I won't stop until it's done." Amara's eyes softened, but only slightly. "We'll see, Gregory. We'll see." As they parted ways that afternoon, Gregory couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and it would be filled with obstacles. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was fighting for something real, something worth fighting for. The first few days after Gregory's conversation with Amara were a blur of action. It was as if the clock had been turned back, and suddenly, all the old assumptions, all the layers of privilege and entitlement that had once seemed so secure, were beginning to crack. Every moment that passed, every piece of information that came to light, only deepened his sense of urgency. Gregory had promised to help Amara expose the truth, but now that the weight of that promise rested on his shoulders, he began to feel its full force. He couldn't undo the decades of destruction caused by the Whitmore family, but he could bring it into the light. And as much as the task seemed insurmountable, there was no turning back. He met Amara and Nathan in a quiet corner of a local cafe one evening, their faces illuminated by the soft, flickering lights of the restaurant. Amara had insisted on meeting in a neutral location. She trusted Gregory, but she didn't trust the people who were still loyal to the Whitmore name. The walls had ears, and the last thing they needed was to be overheard by one of the family's spies. "I've been digging," Gregory said, his voice low but resolute, as he slid a folder across the table. "I found more evidence of Rebecca's involvement in the land deals. These documents show that she and my father weren't just acquiring land. They were destroying communities to make room for their projects." Amara leaned forward, scanning the documents with a practiced eye. Nathan, sitting beside her, crossed his arms over his chest, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man who had lost everything to the Whitmore family, and his loyalty to Amara and the cause was unshakable. "Let me see that," Nathan said, reaching for the stack of papers. He flipped through the pages, his eyes moving quickly over the text. "This is good, Gregory, but it's not enough." Gregory nodded. He knew Nathan was right. The documents, as damning as they were only the beginning. They needed more. They needed something that would put Rebecca directly in the crosshairs of the law. "I've been talking to a few people," Gregory continued, his eyes flicking toward Amara. "I think I can get the FBI involved, but they're going to need more than just paperwork. We need to go public. We need to expose Rebecca for the criminal she is." Amara's face hardened at the mention of going public. "Do you understand what that means? If we go public with this, there's no going back. Rebecca has connections, Gregory, powerful people who will protect her at any cost." "I understand," Gregory said, his voice steady. "But what choice do we have? If we don't take action now, the Whitmore name will continue to be untouchable. It's time to tear down everything they've built." Amara was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the table, as if contemplating the risks. She knew that Gregory was right. The Whitmore family's wealth and power had shielded them for far too long. But she also knew that exposing the truth came with consequences, consequences that would change everything for all of them. "I can't do this alone," Amara said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "But I'll help you. If we're going to take down Rebecca, we're going to need a plan, a good one." Gregory nodded. "I've already started laying the groundwork. We'll need to get to the right people. Journalists, activists, anyone who can amplify our message. We need to make sure that when the truth comes out, it's impossible for anyone to deny it." Nathan shifted in his seat, looking around as if to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "And what about the other families? The ones who've been hurt by this whole mess?" Amara looked at Gregory, her eyes dark with determination. "They need to be part of this too. This isn't just about us. It's about the families who have been destroyed by these people. We need to give them a voice." Gregory sat back in his chair, the weight of their words settling in his chest. He had known the road ahead would be difficult, but the reality of what they were about to do was beginning to hit him. It wasn't just about exposing Rebecca. It wasn't just about bringing down the Whitmore empire. This was about justice, not just for Amara, but for all the people whose lives had been ruined by the greed and manipulation of the Whitmore family. "I'll start reaching out to the press," Gregory said, his voice steady despite the churn of thoughts in his head. "We'll need to make a lot of noise. It's the only way we'll get the attention we need." Amara nodded, her expression hardening. "But we also need to be careful. Rebecca won't go down without a fight. She'll try to discredit us. She'll try to bury the truth." Gregory knew that Amara was right. Rebecca wouldn't go down without a fight. But this time, they had the evidence. They had the truth on their side. And they had each other. "Then we'll make sure she doesn't win," Gregory said, his voice firm. "We'll expose everything, every lie, every betrayal. The Whitmore name won't be able to hide behind its wealth anymore." As they left the cafe that night, Gregory felt a strange sense of resolve settling into his bones. The fight for justice had begun, and there was no turning back now. The road ahead would be long and filled with danger, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was fighting for something that truly mattered, the truth. And it was about time the Whitmore empire faced it. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Gregory felt like a man caught in the middle of an avalanche, helpless but unable to escape the crushing weight of what he had started. Amara's resolve was clear, and Nathan's relentless energy kept pushing them forward. But Gregory found himself struggling with the enormity of their task. Exposing Rebecca was only the beginning. The Whitmore empire, with its decades of power and influence, wasn't going to collapse easily. Gregory sat in his office late one evening, papers scattered across his desk, trying to make sense of the overwhelming evidence they had gathered. His hands shook slightly as he sifted through the documents. Receipts, emails, photos, all of it pointed back to Rebecca. But he knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. The Whitmore name was too entrenched in the fabric of the city. If they wanted to bring Rebecca down, they needed more than just a paper trail. They needed irrefutable proof, something that would reach beyond the walls of the Whitmore estate and into the heart of the media, into the public's consciousness. Amara's voice broke through his thoughts. "You're still thinking about this the wrong way," she said, as she walked into his office, her eyes narrowing at the piles of paper. "This isn't about just exposing Rebecca. It's about proving that the entire system she's a part of is corrupt. It's not just her. It's the whole machine." Gregory looked up, meeting her gaze. He'd seen the fire in her eyes ever since that first meeting. But now, it was more than just determination. It was a deep-seated need for justice. Amara wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting to dismantle an empire built on the backs of people like her. And for the first time, Gregory understood just how deep her fight went. "I know," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. "But if I go public with what we have now, it's just going to look like a smear campaign. We need something bigger. We need something that can't be denied. If I'm going to take down Rebecca, I need to expose her from the inside out." Amara crossed her arms, studying him for a moment before speaking. "I've got something that might help." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "What?" "A confession," she said simply, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket and placing it on the table in front of him. "This is from your father." Gregory's heart skipped a beat. His father, the man he had spent his entire life trying to please, the man whose approval had once meant everything to him. What was on that drive? And why had Amara been the one to find it? "It's a recording," Amara continued, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. "Your father confessing everything. Everything he and Rebecca did to destroy my family, and everything they did to build their empire." Gregory felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the drive. He reached for it with trembling fingers, knowing this would be the thing that either shattered his world or finally gave him the power to destroy Rebecca. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure," Amara replied. "I listened to it myself. It's all there, Gregory. Your father's voice, the deals, the lies, the manipulation." Gregory's mind raced. If this recording was real, it was the key to everything. He could expel Rebecca, end her hold on the Whitmore fortune, and perhaps even redeem himself. But at what cost? What did it mean for him to inherit a legacy so thoroughly tainted? Without another word, Gregory plugged the USB drive into his laptop. The sound of the recording filled the room, sending a shiver down his spine. His father's voice, cold and calculating, echoed through the speakers. "It wasn't just about money," the voice said. "It was about power. Rebecca and I knew that if we wanted to control the land, we had to control the people. We manipulated their fears, their desires, made them believe that they were helpless without us. But we never let them get too close, never let them see how much we were willing to sacrifice for our success. It was worth it. The money, the influence, it was all worth it." Gregory's hands clenched into fists as the words washed over him. He had always known that his father's business practices were ruthless, But this, it was worse than he could have ever imagined. His father wasn't just a businessman. He was a monster, willing to destroy lives for the sake of his empire. And Rebecca? She was his equal, a woman who had not only participated in these crimes, but had orchestrated many of them. "I'm not proud of what we did," the voice continued, "but we did it. And in the end, we built something unbreakable. No one can stop us now." Gregory felt his stomach turn as the recording ended. He sat in stunned silence, his mind struggling to comprehend the full weight of his father's words. He had spent so long trying to honor the legacy of the Whitmore family, but now it felt like a betrayal. Everything he had believed in, everything he had worked for, was a lie. "Do you believe it now?" Amara asked quietly, her voice full of understanding. "This is who your family really is. This is who you were raised to become. But it's not too late to change. You can still make things right." Gregory didn't respond right away. He needed time to process everything. This wasn't just about Rebecca anymore. This was about his entire life, his entire identity. Could he really be the man who brought down the Whitmore empire? Could he undo the damage his family had done? And most importantly, could he live with the consequences? "I don't know if I can do this," Gregory admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can bring everything down, knowing what it means for me, for my future." Amara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. You've already taken the first step. Now, we fight for justice, for the families, for your father's victims, for everyone who's been hurt by the Whitmore name." Gregory nodded, though doubt still clouded his mind. This was no longer just a battle against Rebecca. This was a battle for his soul, for everything he had ever believed in. And yet, deep down, he knew there was no turning back. "Okay," he said, finally making the decision. "Let's bring it all out. Let's expose everything." And with that, the fight for justice truly began. The decision to expose everything was not an easy one for Gregory. Even after everything he had learned, after hearing his father's confession, the weight of what lay ahead was almost unbearable. He had spent his entire life building his identity around the Whitmore name, and now he was about to tear it all down. He couldn't shake the image of his father's face, the cold, calculating expression that had been so familiar to him for years. Was his father a villain, or had Gregory been blind to the truth all along? But there was no turning back now. It was a dark morning when the plan began to take shape. Gregory, Amara, and Nathan gathered in the small office of a community center, a nondescript building in the heart of the city that had become their base of operations. Amara sat at the head of the table, the USB drive still fresh in Gregory's mind. She was resolute, determined. This was her fight, but now it was Gregory's too. Nathan, ever the pragmatic ally, laid out the details. "We have the recording. We have enough evidence to bring her down," Nathan said, his voice sharp. "But it's not enough to just expose her. We need the public to see the depth of the corruption. Rebecca isn't just a criminal. She's a symbol of everything that's wrong with the system. If we want this to stick, we need to destroy her legacy. We need to go beyond just her involvement in these crimes. We need to show what she's done to this community." Gregory, sitting across from them, could barely focus on the plan. His mind kept drifting back to the recording, the voice of his father, so cold, so confident in his manipulation. Could he really expose Rebecca, knowing that it would inevitably expose his father's complicity as well? What would that mean for him, for his family? He clenched his fist at the thought, trying to push the questions aside. There was no time for doubt. "I understand," he finally said, his voice steady. "We'll make sure the truth is undeniable. We need to act quickly before she can bury this. But we have to be careful. We know she has connections, people in high places. She won't go down without a fight." Amara nodded, her eyes hard. "I've been fighting this fight for years, Gregory. I've seen what happens when people in power try to silence the truth. But this time, they won't get away with it. Not anymore." Gregory glanced at her, the intensity in her gaze reminding him of the weight of what they were about to do. Amara had lost everything because of the Whitmore family's greed. This wasn't just a matter of exposing a few secrets for her. It was a matter of justice for an entire community. The stakes had never been higher, and yet, despite the risk, Gregory knew he couldn't back down. That night, they worked well into the early hours, finalizing their plan. They would start with the media. Gregory had connections, people he had known from his days in the business world, people who still respected him despite his family's scandals. He would reach out to them, offer them the story of a lifetime. Amara's evidence, Gregory's testimony, and the shocking truth about Rebecca's involvement. It would be impossible for anyone to ignore. As they finalized their strategy, a new wave of doubt crept into Gregory's mind. Could he really do this? Could he betray his family, expose everything his father had built, and take down Rebecca, the woman who had helped him build his future? She had been his mentor, his confidant. She had been the one to take him under her wing when his father was too distant, too absorbed in his own affairs. And yet, as the pieces fell into place, as he thought about all the people who had been destroyed by the Whitmore empire, the doubts began to fade. The truth had to come out. The damage Rebecca had done wasn't just limited to his family's wealth. It had rippled out, destroying the lives of countless individuals. This was his chance to make things right, to ensure that the Whitmore legacy didn't live on through lies and manipulation. The next day, the plan was set into motion. Gregory reached out to his contacts, carefully, strategically, knowing the power that Rebecca still wielded. It was clear that she wasn't going down without a fight. She had always been ruthless, always one step ahead of her enemies. But this time, it was different. This time, she didn't have the luxury of staying hidden in the shadows. The world was about to see what she had truly done, and it wouldn't be pretty. The first article broke the next morning. It was just a small piece, barely a blip in the media cycle, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the city. Rebecca Whitmore, the heiress to the Whitmore fortune, accused of exploiting entire communities, of being complicit in crimes that had gone unnoticed for years. The headline was enough to grab attention, but it was the accompanying story that sent the message home. Amara's voice rang out clearly in the piece. She told her story, the story of how Rebecca's family had ruined hers, how the Whitmores had destroyed entire neighborhoods to make their fortune. The article detailed the lies, the manipulation, the underhanded tactics that Rebecca had employed over the years. It was enough to get people talking, enough to make others start questioning the Whitmore empire. But Rebecca wasn't going to let it go down so easily. That afternoon, Gregory received a call from her. "Gregory," Rebecca's voice was calm, almost too calm, as if nothing had changed. "I see you've joined the opposition. How cute. Do you really think you can take me down with a few accusations? You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Gregory's pulse quickened, but he kept his tone even. "I'm not doing this for you, Rebecca. I'm doing this for the people you've destroyed, for the families whose lives you ruined for the sake of your empire." She laughed, the sound cold and devoid of any real warmth. "You think they'll listen to you? You think they'll believe anything you say after everything your father did to build this legacy? You can't erase history, Gregory. You're too far gone to turn back now. This is who you are. This is who you've always been. Gregory's stomach churned at her words. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had been raised to believe in the Whitmore legacy, to uphold the family name at all costs. But now, for the first time, he realized that he didn't need that legacy to define him. "You're wrong," he said, his voice low but steady. "This isn't about the family name. This is about justice, and justice will prevail." The line went dead, but Gregory didn't feel a sense of satisfaction. Instead, he felt the gravity of what he had just done. Rebecca wasn't going to go down without a fight, but Gregory wasn't afraid anymore. He had made his choice, and now it was time to see it through. The public revelation of Rebecca's criminal activities spread like wildfire, but the true scope of the impact hadn't fully hit Gregory yet. As the news outlets expanded on the story, the Whitmore name, once synonymous with wealth and influence, became a symbol of corruption and greed. What had been the pride of his family's legacy had turned into a national scandal, exposing the dark underbelly of their empire. The Whitmore estate itself, once an exclusive retreat, had become a constant reminder of the wrongs they had done to countless families, and for Gregory, it felt more like a prison than the home he had known all his life. In the days following the media frenzy, Gregory took his first steps towards redemption. He spent hours behind closed doors, strategizing with Amara and Nathan, laying the groundwork for the long road ahead. But no amount of planning could undo the damage that had been done, at least not immediately. It was clear that the community would need more than just words. They needed action. Gregory wasn't just battling his family's legacy. He was fighting against an entire system that had been built on inequality and exploitation. In truth, he hadn't known the full extent of the damage until he saw the people whose lives had been ruined by his family's greed. But now, as the scope of Rebecca's actions continued to unfold, he was fully aware of the monstrous power they had wielded over the years. Gregory sat in the small, dimly lit office of the community center, his mind racing. Amara and Nathan were with him, their faces marked by the fatigue of a long, exhausting fight. Yet even in the midst of this storm, there was a sense of resolve in Amara's eyes that Gregory found both inspiring and humbling. She was no stranger to this kind of fight. She had lived it for years, but Gregory, on the other hand, had lived in the comfort of privilege for far too long. "We've taken the first step," Nathan said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. "Rebecca's been exposed, and the media's already starting to catch wind of her true history. But it's not enough. We need to rebuild, to give these people more than just a story. We need to show them we can make things right." Gregory nodded, taking in Nathan's words. The plan they had set in motion was only the beginning. He knew that, despite all the media attention, the real battle lay ahead. They had to rebuild what had been destroyed, the communities that Rebecca's actions had torn apart. And he would be damned if he let her legacy live on, even in its crumbling form. But that didn't mean the path ahead would be easy. The fallout from the expose hit the Whitmore family harder than any of them had expected. While Rebecca remained defiant, attempting to deny the evidence and spin the narrative in her favor, the public was already turning against her. The stories that had come to light were impossible to ignore. There were reports of people who had lost their homes, their businesses, their entire livelihoods because of Rebecca's ruthless pursuit of profit. Entire neighborhoods had been driven to ruin, and families torn apart by her exploitation. Gregory knew that the damage wasn't limited to his family's wealth. The emotional toll on the community, on the families affected by the Whitmore's greed, was something that couldn't be undone with just money. Still, that didn't mean he wouldn't do what he could. Amara had been a constant presence in the community, working with local organizations to provide resources for those who had been affected. She had grown close to the families who had been displaced, the ones whose lives had been destroyed by the Whitmore family's empire. They had lost everything, but they still had their voices, and with those voices, they were starting to fight back. Amara had become a leader in the truest sense of the word, a beacon of hope for the people who had been pushed aside for so long. Gregory had never known the pain of being a victim. He had never had to fight for his place in the world, and that was something he couldn't change. But what he could change was the way his family's wealth was used. He knew now that it could no longer be used to further their own selfish goals. It had to be used to right the wrongs that had been committed. The first step in the redemption plan was simple: dismantling the Whitmore fortune. Gregory knew that holding on to the money, the property, the power, it was all part of the problem. So he began the process of liquidating the assets, funneling the money into a fund that would be used to rebuild the neighborhoods that had been destroyed. Amara had helped him set up a foundation, one that would focus on providing financial support to the displaced families, helping them rebuild their homes and businesses. But the work didn't stop there. It had to go beyond just financial aid. It had to be about giving these communities the tools they needed to thrive, to be self-sustaining, and to ensure that they would never again be at the mercy of people like Rebecca. The first community project was a housing development in the heart of the neighborhood that had once been decimated by the Whitmore family's greed. Gregory and Amara walked the streets together, surveying the area. The houses were dilapidated, the infrastructure crumbling. But even in the face of such overwhelming destruction, there was hope. They had a long way to go, but it was a start. "I know this won't fix everything," Gregory said, his voice quiet as he looked out at the ruins. "But it's something, and it's more than what anyone else has ever done." Amara smiled faintly, the exhaustion in her eyes evident. "It's more than enough. But we can't stop here. We need to keep pushing, keep fighting. This isn't just about rebuilding houses. It's about rebuilding trust. It's about showing people that they're worth more than the Whitmores ever thought they were." Gregory took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. "Then, that's exactly what we'll do." Meanwhile, Rebecca was not sitting idly by. Despite the mounting evidence, the media coverage, and the pressure from both the public and law enforcement, she refused to go down without a fight. She was a woman who had always gotten what she wanted, no matter the cost. And now, with her empire crumbling, she wasn't about to let it all slip away. She had contacted her lawyers, trying to orchestrate a counterattack. The courts were her battleground, and she was determined to use her connections to turn the tables. The strategy was clear: discredit Gregory, discredit Amara, and make the whole thing seem like a baseless attack on her legacy. But deep down, Rebecca knew that she couldn't escape the truth. The walls were closing in, and the truth about her past was becoming too loud to ignore. For the first time in her life, she could feel the empire she had built slipping through her fingers, and the desperation began to show. In the weeks that followed, Gregory continued to work, alongside Amara and Nathan, to rebuild what had been lost. It was exhausting work, but every small victory, a newly built house, a community event, a family reunited, was a step towards healing. And slowly, the community began to thrive again. The people who had once been forgotten were now the ones shaping the future, taking control of their destinies. Gregory couldn't undo the past, but he was determined to make sure that the future would be different. The Whitmore name might have been tarnished beyond repair, but through his actions, he could help create a new legacy, one that was rooted in justice, community, and most importantly, redemption. The community center, once an abandoned shell of what it used to be, was now alive with purpose. People from all walks of life had gathered in the hopes of rebuilding not just their homes, but their very futures. It was a quiet revolution, a movement sparked by the injustice of the past, but fueled by the hope for a brighter tomorrow. The weeks since Rebecca's arrest had been filled with hard work, long nights, and the determination to reclaim what had been taken from them. For Gregory, the transformation was both physical and emotional. He had spent the past several weeks traveling between various neighborhoods, visiting displaced families, meeting with community leaders, and pushing for reforms that would make a lasting impact. The shift was palpable in every conversation, every handshake, every thank you he received. But there were still moments when he wondered if it was enough. Could he truly undo the years of damage his family had inflicted? Could the scars left by generations of exploitation be healed with a few months of hard work? As he walked through the newly constructed homes, small but sturdy, with bright walls and smiling faces, the weight of his decisions began to settle in. This was his first taste of redemption, but it was also the beginning of a much longer journey. Amara had been his guide, his moral compass, but now he felt the need to take the lead in this effort. He had spent years under the shadow of his family's legacy, but this was his chance to build something that would stand on its own, something that future generations could look to as a symbol of progress and change. Amara, too, had found herself in a new role, one she had never imagined for herself. While she had always fought for justice, never in her wildest dreams had she expected to see the kind of change that was now taking place. The same community that had once been devastated by the Whitmore family's actions was now rising from the ashes. It was a slow process, but every success, every victory, no matter how small, felt like a personal triumph for Amara and the families who had fought so hard to get to this point. The first step in the rebuilding process was providing housing for those who had lost everything. Through the newly established foundation, funds were channeled into constructing affordable homes, offering families a place to start fresh. It wasn't just about physical structures, it was about rebuilding lives. Each home that was built represented the resilience of the people who had once been silenced, and each brick laid was a symbol of the justice they had fought for. But as much as the physical rebuilding was important, it was the emotional rebuilding that truly mattered. Many of the families who had been affected by the Whitmore family's greed had lost not only their homes, but also their sense of security. The idea that they could trust anyone again, let alone those in power, seemed like an impossible task. Yet, Amara and Gregory knew that without trust, there could be no true recovery. That's where the community programs came in. Amara had worked tirelessly with local leaders to establish mentorship programs, financial literacy workshops, and emotional support groups. These initiatives aim to empower individuals to not only rebuild their lives, but also to stand up for themselves and advocate for the change they had long been denied. As much as the community began to heal, there was still the lingering presence of Rebecca's influence. Her trial was still ongoing, and her lawyers had pulled every trick in the book to try to delay the proceedings. But no matter how hard she fought, the truth had already been exposed, and the weight of her actions had already begun to unravel the empire she had so carefully crafted. Gregory knew that even as Rebecca sat behind bars, her influence could still reach into the cracks of the community they were trying to rebuild. There were those who still clung to the old ways, who refused to believe the truth, who would do anything to preserve the Whitmore name. These were the people who had once been at the center of Rebecca's operation, the ones who had helped her maintain control over the neighborhoods, the ones who had been complicit in her exploitation. The fear that they might undermine the progress being made was real, but it was also the driving force behind Gregory's resolve. He knew that in order to truly move forward, they had to eliminate all remnants of Rebecca's control. They couldn't afford to let the past dictate their future any longer. The weight of leadership was heavier than Gregory had ever imagined. There was no roadmap for this kind of redemption, no clear path to follow. But as the days turned into weeks, he found himself slowly earning the respect of the community, not through his words, but through his actions. He had come to understand that the true test of his character lay in his willingness to serve, not to lead from behind a desk or to make decisions from a place of privilege, but to show up every day and fight for what was right. He had taken steps to distance himself from the Whitmore legacy, using the resources he had once fought to protect to fund community programs, job creation initiatives, and educational outreach. His primary focus was on the future, the children who had been given no opportunity to succeed because of the structures his family had put in place. He knew that without education, without opportunity, the cycle of exploitation would continue, and the community would never fully recover. Through these programs, Gregory became more than just the heir to a disgraced empire. He became a catalyst for change, a symbol of hope for those who had long been forgotten. But as the pressure mounted, as the demands of the community continued to grow, Gregory realized that the redemption he sought wasn't just about fixing what had been broken. It was about giving people the tools to fix their own lives, to take control of their futures, and to build something stronger than what had been taken from them. Amara, too, had embraced her newfound role as a leader. She had spent so long fighting for others, but now, with the community beginning to heal, she found herself in a position to inspire change on a larger scale. Her personal journey had been a testament to the power of resilience, but it was now clear to her that the true measure of success would be how well she could help others rise up, just as she had. As the foundation grew, Amara worked to expand its reach, ensuring that the work they were doing would have a lasting impact. She knew that their fight wasn't just about bringing justice to the past, it was about preventing future injustices from occurring. That meant advocating for policy changes, ensuring that the wealth and power of those like the Whitmores would no longer be able to harm the vulnerable communities that had been victimized for so long. With Gregory's help, Amara began to push for reforms that would make systemic changes in the way neighborhoods were governed, the way resources were distributed, and the way communities were treated. Their efforts had already begun to catch the attention of local officials, but Amara knew that this was just the beginning. As Gregory and Amara worked to solidify their efforts, Rebecca made one final desperate attempt to claw her way back to power. She had quietly begun to manipulate those within her circle, attempting to create a network of influence that could rival the one she had once held. But her efforts were futile. The truth about her past actions was out there. It was no longer possible to deny or bury the reality of what she had done. As her trial neared its conclusion, Rebecca's desperation became more apparent. She could no longer rely on her money, her influence, or her connections to maintain control. All she had left was her pride, and that too was quickly slipping away. The future of the community lay in the hands of those who had suffered the most, and those who were willing to stand by them. Gregory and Amara knew that they could not undo the past, but they could help build a future where the past would never repeat itself. Their work was far from over, but each day brought new opportunities to forge a better path. A path built on trust, on community, and on the unwavering belief that justice could and would prevail. As they stood side by side, looking out over the community they had fought so hard to rebuild, they knew that they had created something worth fighting for. And it was only the beginning. The air was crisp, the early morning sun, casting long shadows over the streets of the newly revitalized community. For the first time in years, the neighborhoods that had once been swallowed by despair now stood tall and full of promise. Every corner, every sidewalk seemed to hold the echoes of a journey that had only just begun. Gregory stood at the edge of what used to be an abandoned lot, now home to a bustling community center, and watched as families trickled in, ready to take part in the programs that would change their futures. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air, and the sound of children's laughter rang out, a reminder of how far they had come. This wasn't just about the physical structures that had been built. It was about something deeper, about reclaiming their humanity, their dignity, and their sense of worth. The work wasn't finished, but it was moving forward, and that was something to be proud of. Gregory had spent the past few weeks working closely with Amara, overseeing the launch of several community-driven initiatives aimed at not just rebuilding homes, but rebuilding lives. The truth had finally come to light, and the people had spoken. But now, the real work had begun. The work of creating a future where the mistakes of the past would never repeat. Gregory had come a long way since that fateful day when Amara had exposed the Whitmore family's wrongdoings at the wedding. That moment, when everything changed, had marked the beginning of his personal transformation. The weight of his family's legacy had hung over him like a shadow for so long that he could hardly imagine a life free of it. But now, as he worked alongside Amara and the community, he realized that he no longer had to live in the shadow of the past. He could forge his own path. The once invincible heir to the Whitmore fortune was now a man on a mission, one driven not by money or power, but by a deep sense of responsibility to those who had been affected by his family's greed. Every step he took in the community was a step toward redemption, a step toward righting the wrongs that had been done for generations. It wasn't easy. Gregory still had moments where he questioned whether he was doing enough, whether he could ever undo the harm his family had caused. But then he would see the faces of the people he was helping. Families rebuilding their homes, children attending new schools, adults learning the skills they needed to find better jobs. And he knew that what he was doing mattered. Every day brought him closer to the man he wanted to become. Amara, too, had undergone a transformation of her own. The pain of her past, the loss, the betrayal, the years spent fighting for justice was still there, but it no longer defined her. Now, she was a leader in the community, helping to guide others on their own journeys of healing and redemption. She had become the person she had always needed when she was younger, a mentor, a champion, a symbol of hope. Her work was far from done. There were still families to help, still injustices to right, still battles to be fought. But Amara had found a new purpose in the work they were doing together. The foundation she had helped build was no longer just about exposing the truth. It was about giving people the tools to create a better future for themselves and their children. And that, to her, was the most powerful form of justice. Amara had also found a sense of peace, knowing that her fight for justice hadn't been in vain. As the community began to rebuild, she had become a beacon of light for others who were still struggling to find their way out of the darkness. Every success, every triumph, was a testament to the power of perseverance and the strength of the human spirit. Meanwhile, the once pristine Whitmore estate stood as a stark reminder of the empire built on greed and exploitation. It was still there, looming in the background, but it had lost its power. The mansion, which had once symbolized the Whitmore family's dominance, was now a relic of the past. No longer was it a place of influence or control. It was just a house, empty and silent, as if the ghosts of its past had finally been laid to rest. Gregory had made the decision to sell the estate and use the proceeds to fund community projects. The mansion, with its opulent rooms and grand halls, would be turned into something new, a space for the community, a place where people could come together and work toward the future. It was a symbolic gesture, a way of turning the page on the past and creating something that would truly serve the people. The transformation of the Whitmore estate mirrored the transformation of the community itself. What had once been a place of privilege and exploitation was now being repurposed for the greater good. It was a reminder that even the darkest legacies could be transformed into something beautiful if the will to change was strong enough. As the weeks went by, Gregory and Amara's partnership grew stronger. They were no longer just allies in the fight for justice. They had become friends, confidants, and co-champions of the community's future. Together, they had built something that was greater than either of them could have done alone. Their shared vision for a better future had brought them together, and their combined efforts were now shaping the community in ways they had never imagined. There were still moments of tension, moments when the weight of their responsibilities felt too heavy to bear. But through it all, they had each other to lean on. They had learned to trust one another, to challenge each other, and to celebrate their victories together. They knew that they were building something that would last, something that would stand the test of time. And in the quiet moments, when the work slowed down and the noise of the world faded away, Gregory and Amara would reflect on how far they had come. They would look back at the journey they had taken together, the challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, and they would realize that it had all been worth it. They had fought for something bigger than themselves, and in doing so, they had created a new legacy, one built on justice, hope, and the promise of a better tomorrow. As the community continued to thrive, the new legacy that Gregory and Amara had created began to take root. The programs they had put in place were making a tangible difference, and the once broken families that had been torn apart by greed and exploitation were now beginning to rebuild their lives. The children who had once been denied the opportunity to succeed were now thriving in schools that offered them a real chance at a better future. The adults, many of whom had struggled to make ends meet, were now finding meaningful work, building careers, and providing for their families. The neighborhood, once divided by poverty and injustice, was now united by a shared sense of purpose and a common goal: to create a future where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. But perhaps the most powerful part of the new legacy was the sense of hope that had been restored. The community had once been shattered by the actions of the Whitmore family, but now it was whole again. It was a place where people believed in their own potential, where they believed that change was not only possible, but inevitable. And that belief was something that would continue to drive them forward, long after the work of rebuilding was done. Gregory and Amara knew that this was just the beginning. They had laid the foundation for a better future, but there was still much work to be done. They would continue to fight for justice, to push for change, and to ensure that the community they had helped rebuild would never again fall victim to the exploitation and greed that had defined the past. But for now, as they stood together, looking out over the community they had helped create, they knew that they had made a difference. They had turned a page in history, and with every step they took, they were writing a new chapter, one that would be remembered not for the mistakes of the past, but for the promise of a brighter future. The streets of the community hummed with an energy that had been absent for far too long. From every corner, there were signs of change. New murals adorned the walls, fresh gardens bloomed where there had once been abandoned lots, and families filled the sidewalks, talking, laughing, and moving forward together. The transformation was palpable, a clear testament to the resilience of the people and the power of hope. Gregory stood at the front of the community center, watching as the new generation took their place in a world that was no longer defined by the sins of the past. It had been months since they had started the journey of rebuilding, not just the homes or the infrastructure, but the very spirit of the place. Every step forward felt like a victory. And yet, Gregory knew the true battle was still ahead. The real work of justice was never finished. It wasn't just about exposing the Whitmore family's crimes or rebuilding homes. It was about changing the very systems that allowed that kind of exploitation to happen in the first place. It was about ensuring that the next generation would grow up in a world where their worth was never determined by the color of their skin or the size of their bank account. Amara sat in the small office at the heart of the community center, the walls adorned with photos of the families who had been a part of the journey. She had a smile on her face, but there was a sadness in her eyes, the kind that came from knowing how hard they had fought to get here. The battle had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. She looked at the framed photo of her mother on the wall, a woman who had fought for justice even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Her mother's legacy had always been a guiding light for Amara. But now, as she watched the community transform, Amara realized that her own legacy was just beginning. The work she had done here, alongside Gregory, Nathan, and so many others, was just the beginning of something far greater than she had ever imagined. For Amara, the true meaning of justice wasn't about punishment. It was about healing. It was about empowering people to take back control of their lives, to reclaim their sense of dignity and worth. She had learned that justice wasn't something you could simply demand. It was something you had to build, brick by brick, day by day. As Gregory watched the children run past him, their laughter filling the air, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. These were the faces of the future, the ones who would carry the torch of justice and equality forward. But it wasn't just about the children. It was about the community as a whole. Together, they had built something that no one could take away. They had created a place where people could live and thrive without fear, a place where the wounds of the past could finally begin to heal. The community had become more than just a group of people living in the same area. They had become a family, bound together by a shared sense of purpose and a commitment to making the world a better place. It was that unity that had allowed them to survive, to rebuild, and to grow stronger with each passing day. And as the community continued to flourish, Gregory couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The transformation was not just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, and cultural. The people who had once been broken by injustice were now the ones leading the charge for change, and that, to him, was the true power of justice. Gregory walked into the room, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. He found Amara deep in thought, her fingers tracing the edge of the photograph on the wall. Without a word, he walked over and stood next to her, looking at the same photo of her mother. "I think she'd be proud of you," Gregory said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. Amara didn't reply at first. She simply nodded, the weight of her mother's absence still heavy on her heart. But the words meant something, and for that, she was grateful. "You've done more than anyone could have asked," Gregory continued. "We've all done something important here." Amara smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This community, this new world we're building, it's because of you too." The words hung in the air, but both knew it was more than just a simple compliment. Their partnership had been hard-earned, forged through countless struggles and challenges, but now it was something that was stronger than either of them could have imagined. Together, they had done more than expose the wrongdoings of the past. They had created a new path forward, one that was rooted in love, justice, and community. It wasn't perfect, But it was a start, and that, they both knew, was enough. As they sat in the office, discussing the next steps in the ongoing effort to ensure the community's future was secure, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A young woman, no older than 20, stepped in, holding a clipboard in her hands. She introduced herself as Jasmine, one of the recent high school graduates who had joined the community's education initiative. "I've been talking to the younger kids," Jasmine said, her voice filled with excitement. "They're eager to learn, to be a part of this change. They want to know how they can help, what they can do to make a difference." Amara smiled, feeling a surge of pride. The next generation was already picking up the mantle. It was more than just a passing interest. It was a commitment to the future, a commitment to ensuring that the community would remain strong long after they were gone. Gregory and Amara looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. The work wasn't done. It never would be. But with each person who stepped forward, with each new voice raised in support of justice, they knew they were moving in the right direction. As the day came to an end, Gregory and Amara stood outside the community center, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of pink and gold. The work was far from over, but they had made a difference, a real difference. Amara turned to Gregory, a quiet determination in her eyes. "We've built something important," she said, "but it's up to them now. The future is in their hands." Gregory nodded, knowing that Amara was right. The future was no longer theirs to control. It was now in the hands of the people who had fought beside them, the people who had believed in the vision they had shared. And it was in the hands of the new generation, the ones who would carry the torch of justice forward. The work of rebuilding had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. They had shown that even in the face of unimaginable odds, it was possible to change the world. And with that, Gregory and Amara knew that they had not only rebuilt a community, they had rebuilt a legacy. The city was beginning to feel different. A sense of calm had settled over it, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. It wasn't just the physical transformation of the community, but a shift that had taken root deep within the hearts of its people. Gregory could feel it, an unspoken but undeniable sense of healing. It was as though they had all been waiting for something, the right moment, the right circumstances, to push through the darkness and emerge into a future where hope was no longer just a word, but a reality. Gregory stood on the balcony of his modest apartment, overlooking the city, his gaze focused on the streets below. He had been walking a fine line for months, trying to reconcile the life he had known with the person he had become. He no longer saw himself as part of the Whitmore legacy. The empire his family had built, based on exploitation, manipulation, and greed, was a distant memory, something he had shed like an old skin. But there were still moments, fleeting and sharp, when the past crept in. He remembered the first time he stood on this balcony, not long after the exposure of the Whitmore family's crimes. He had felt lost, as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. It had been hard to know who he was, without the weight of the Whitmore name pressing down on him. But that had been before he had truly understood what it meant to build something of real value. He had thought that wealth and power defined a man. Now he knew that true power lay in giving others the opportunity to rise, to find their own voice, and to reclaim what had been stolen from them. Amara was at the community center once again, overseeing the latest initiative, an educational program designed to provide young people with the skills they needed to succeed in a world that had always been stacked against them. She had poured her heart and soul into this project, knowing that it was not just about giving them knowledge, it was about giving them a future. She had seen what could happen when people were given the tools, to break free from the cycles of poverty and oppression. It wasn't just about teaching math or science. It was about teaching them that they were worthy, that they had value, and that they could change the world. Amara moved through the halls of the center, her heart swelling with pride, as she watched the young people eagerly participating in the lessons. They were determined, hungry for the knowledge that had always been kept from them. They weren't just students. They were future leaders, the ones who would carry the mantle forward and ensure that the mistakes of the past were never repeated. As she entered one of the classrooms, a young girl looked up from her work, her eyes shining with determination. "Amara," she said, her voice confident, "I want to start my own nonprofit one day. I want to help people like we've been helped." Amara's eyes softened as she smiled. "You're going to do great things. I just know it." She left the room, a quiet sense of accomplishment filling her. This was why she had fought so hard, why she had risked everything to bring justice to her community. For moments like this, when the future seemed full of endless possibilities, she had been through hell, but now she was seeing the fruits of her labor. The new generation, rising and ready to take on the world. Back at his apartment, Gregory's thoughts turned to Amara. He had been reflecting on everything they had been through together. It was more than just a partnership. It had been a journey of mutual growth, of understanding each other's pain and hopes, and of realizing that they both wanted the same thing, justice. At first, it had been hard for Gregory to understand the depth of Amara's pain. He had never experienced the kind of systemic oppression that she had endured. But through their work together, he had come to realize that justice was not just about punishing the guilty. It was about healing the wounds of the past, about giving those who had suffered a chance to reclaim what had been taken from them. He thought about their first meeting, when Amara had barged into that wedding and exposed the truth. He had been so sure of himself then, so certain that his family's legacy was something to protect. He had been blind to the damage it had caused, to the lives that had been destroyed in the pursuit of power and wealth. Now, he understood that true strength came from vulnerability, from being willing to confront the truth, no matter how painful. He had lost his family's fortune, but he had gained something far more valuable: the respect of the community, the trust of people who had been betrayed for generations. And most importantly, he had gained Amara's friendship. It had taken time, but they had become a team, supporting each other through every challenge. Their bond was unspoken, built on a shared understanding that they were both fighting for something bigger than themselves. As the evening approached, Gregory and Amara found themselves at the community center once again. The lights outside flickered as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the streets. Gregory leaned against the wall, watching as Amara spoke to a group of young adults, teaching them about the importance of community and activism. Her words were powerful, resonating with the crowd, and Gregory couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had been a part of this, part of the movement to rebuild and to bring justice. But now, as he watched the next generation take the lead, he understood that it was their turn. It was up to them to continue the work that had been started, to carry the torch and light the way for others to follow. For Gregory, it was a moment of quiet reflection. He had come full circle. The man who had once been consumed by wealth and privilege had become a man who understood the true meaning of justice. He had fought for it, bled for it, and in the end, he had found peace. The path had not been easy, but it had been worth it. Amara and Gregory stood side by side, looking out at the community they had helped to rebuild. The lights shone brightly, illuminating the streets below, a symbol of the new life they had created. It was more than just a neighborhood. It was a living testament to what could be achieved when people came together, when they fought, for what was right. Gregory turned to Amara, his eyes full of gratitude. "We've done it," he said quietly. Amara smiled, her voice full of quiet confidence. "We've just begun." The future was bright, and they both knew it. Together, they had created something that no one could ever take away, a legacy of justice, hope, and unity. And as the night fell, they knew that their work wasn't over. The road ahead would still be difficult, and the fight for justice would continue. But they had built something that would last, something that would endure for generations to come. A community, a family united in the belief that justice was not just a concept, it was a way of life. The air was thick with anticipation. The community had gathered in the town hall for what would be one of the most pivotal meetings of their lives. It wasn't just about the reconstruction efforts, the rebuilding of homes, or the revitalization of their local schools. This meeting was about reclaiming their voice, taking back the power that had been stolen from them by the Whitmore family and their empire of corruption. This was the moment when the community would officially step into its own, its members united by a single purpose: to ensure that the injustices of the past would never be repeated. Amara stood at the front of the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had come to rely on her strength, her leadership. There were men and women of all ages, their expressions a mixture of hope and determination. This was the culmination of years of work, years of fighting for justice, for the opportunity to reclaim what had been stolen from them. And now, here they were, ready to speak as one. Amara cleared her throat, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "We've been silenced for far too long," she began, her words echoing in the room. "For generations, we've been victims of a system that was built to keep us down. But today, that ends. Today we speak with one voice. Today we demand justice, and we demand that our future be shaped by us, not by the ones who sought to exploit us." Her words were met with a wave of applause, the room coming alive with energy. It was clear that they were ready. The battle had been long and painful, but they were standing at the threshold of something powerful, a movement that would not just change their lives, but inspire others across the nation. Gregory stood quietly at the back of the room, watching as Amara spoke. His journey had led him to this very moment, one where he was no longer just a spectator, but an active participant in the fight for justice. He had given up everything for this cause, and now, as he watched the community take ownership of their future, he knew it had all been worth it. He had found his place here, not as the heir to the Whitmore fortune, but as a man who had finally chosen the side of what was right. As Amara finished her speech, the room erupted in applause once more. There was a newfound sense of purpose in the air, a belief that they could reshape the future, one decision at a time. Amara stepped back from the podium and motioned for the first speaker to come forward. A middle-aged man named Nathan, who had lost his home and family due to the Whitmore family's greed, took the microphone. "We're not just here to heal our wounds," Nathan said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "We're here to make sure the ones who did this to us can never do it again. This is our town, and we won't let anyone destroy it again. We're stronger than they ever knew." His words resonated with the crowd, and Gregory felt a deep swell of admiration for the community. They had been through so much, yet they were standing strong, ready to take action. It wasn't just about the fight for justice anymore. It was about reclaiming their dignity and their right to determine their own future. As the meeting progressed, several other speakers took their turn, each one passionately articulating the ways in which they had been affected by the Whitmore family's actions. There was the young woman who had grown up in poverty because of the real estate schemes that had displaced her family. There was the former teacher who had been forced into early retirement due to the cuts made to public education by the Whitmores. And there were dozens of others, each with their own story to tell. For the first time in years, the voices of the oppressed were being heard. And not only were they being heard, they were being amplified. The room was charged with energy, with the belief that they could create real, lasting change. As the last speaker finished, Amara stood up again. She had listened intently to everyone's stories, her heart swelling with both sorrow and pride. These were her people, her community, and she was determined to ensure they had the support they needed to thrive. "We are stronger together," Amara said, her voice firm. "And it's not just about us standing here today. It's about what we're going to do tomorrow. We need to ensure that we never go back to the way things were. We need to take action, and we need to do it now." The room erupted in cheers. It was clear. This was no longer just a community that had suffered. It was a community that had found its power. They had come together, their voices unified, and they were ready to make their mark on the world. As Amara finished, Gregory stepped forward. He could feel the eyes of the room on him. It was time for him to speak, to take responsibility for the past, and to show that he was fully committed to the cause. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," he began, his voice raw with emotion. "But I'm here to tell you that I will do everything I can to make this right. I am not the man I once was. The Whitmore name will no longer define me. I'm here to help you rebuild, to make sure that this community is given the justice that it deserves. And I will stand with you every step of the way." The room fell silent for a moment before a wave of applause broke out. Gregory knew this wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about doing the hard work, day in and day out, to right the wrongs of the past. He was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. He had made his peace with his own choices, but now it was time to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people who had made his own redemption possible. As the meeting came to a close, Amara and Gregory walked outside together. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city that had come to symbolize their struggle and their triumph. The streets were filled with people, all of them heading home, their hearts full of hope and their minds focused on the future. "This is just the beginning," Amara said, looking out over the crowd. "We've still got a long way to go, but I have no doubt we'll get there. Together." Gregory nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "We've got this," he said quietly. "We've got this." As they walked down the street, side by side, the future seemed brighter than it had in years. The community had spoken, and now they were ready to lead. The echo of the meeting still resonated in the streets of their town. It was the beginning of something bigger than all of them. Amara walked through the crowd, her heart heavy with both the burden and the weight of their collective journey. They had crossed the hardest part. Now came the long road ahead, the work that would define not just their futures, but the legacy they were about to build. For months, the community had struggled to define what they would do next. But now, as they gathered in the streets, there was clarity in their purpose. It wasn't just about dismantling the Whitmore empire. It was about making sure that nothing like it could ever happen again. The foundation of their new world would be built on unity, justice, and opportunity for all. As Amara passed by a group of families standing together, she could feel the weight of her mission settle on her shoulders. These were the people who had lost so much, who had lived in the shadows for too long. But now, they stood tall, ready to claim what was rightfully theirs. They were no longer victims. They were survivors. And they were going to rebuild, brick by brick, with the truth as their foundation. Gregory's life had been defined by wealth, power, and privilege. He had lived for years under the assumption that success was a result of his family's ruthlessness. But in the months since he had joined the community in their fight, everything had changed. He was no longer the heir to the Whitmore fortune. He was simply Gregory Whitmore, a man trying to make amends for the past. In the days following the community meeting, Gregory had spent hours working with Amara and the other leaders to draft a comprehensive plan for rebuilding. He had committed every resource he had, not to reviving the empire his family had created, but to ensuring that the next generation would have a fighting chance at a future free from exploitation. The process wasn't easy. They faced resistance at every turn, from city officials who were still in the pockets of wealthy elites to members of the media who sought to protect the Whitmore legacy. But Gregory was steadfast. The more he worked with the people, the more he realized that this wasn't about saving face. It was about confronting the truth head on. Each day he spent in the community, whether it was working on the legal aspects of restitution or helping families rebuild their homes, he felt the shift deep within himself. It wasn't just his own redemption he was after. It was about helping the community rebuild from the ground up, ensuring that no future generation would ever have to endure what they had been through. Amara stood at the center of the room, where the community leaders had gathered. The space was buzzing with conversations, all focused on the details of the new initiatives they were about to launch. There was work to be done, and there were still so many challenges to overcome. But Amara could feel the collective strength of everyone present. They had all come together for this moment, and now it was time to make their vision a reality. Gregory entered the room, his expression focused, his demeanor resolute. He had spent the last few hours reviewing documents and drafting legal frameworks for the new policies that would soon be implemented. The work was monumental, but for the first time, he felt capable of handling it. Amara. Gregory greeted her with a nod. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the fierce determination that had carried them this far. I think we're ready to take the next step. Amara looked up from the stack of papers in front of her and smiled. It's time, she said, her voice firm. We've already begun. Now, we just need to make sure we're bringing the right people along for the ride. Gregory nodded. It was true. They needed support, not just from the people who had been harmed by the Whitmores, but from everyone. This wasn't just a fight for restitution. This was a fight for the soul of the town. And that meant they had to convince those who had remained on the sidelines to take a stand with them. It wasn't just the community that was changing. The city as a whole was beginning to stir. Over the last few months, they had seen protests and rallies, with citizens demanding that their government do more to ensure that the injustices of the past were not repeated. Many of the city's elected officials had been slow to act, hesitant to confront the power structures that had long controlled the city. But Amara and Gregory's efforts had forced their hand. It started with small steps, city meetings where residents voiced their concerns, organizations lobbying for change. But soon, it escalated. The pressure was too much for the system to ignore, and soon, the city began to adopt new policies aimed at dismantling the structures of wealth inequality that had long persisted. More and more, the city's residents were joining forces, demanding an end to the cycle of exploitation that had dominated their lives for so long. There were still those who fought against it, politicians, businessmen, and those in positions of power who had profited from the status quo. But they were becoming fewer and fewer. The voices of the people were louder now, and with every day that passed, it became clearer that change was not only possible, it was inevitable. As Amara looked around the room at the growing group of leaders, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. They had come so far from where they started, They had been fighting for justice for so long that at times it had felt like the mountain was too steep to climb. But now, the summit was in sight, and she could see the difference they were making. Gregory was more than just a man trying to atone for his family's wrongs. He had become a critical ally in the fight for justice. His influence, while once a source of oppression, was now a tool for positive change. And while Amara had initially doubted his sincerity, she could no longer deny the depth of his commitment to the cause. "Together, we can accomplish anything," Amara said, her voice cutting through the chatter of the room. "We've seen what happens when we stand divided, but now we have the power to rewrite the future. Let's make sure it's a future where justice doesn't just exist on paper. It's something that we live every day." The room fell silent as everyone took in her words. Then, one by one, they nodded in agreement. With a renewed sense of purpose, Amara, Gregory, and the other leaders began drafting new policies, programs, and initiatives aimed at rebuilding the community from the ground up. The challenges ahead were immense, but Amara knew that they had already faced the worst. Now, it was time to focus on the future. And as she looked around at the people standing beside her, each of them committed to building something better, she realized that the work they were doing would not only change their town, it would change the world. This was more than just about seeking justice. It was about creating a legacy of hope that would endure for generations to come. As the days passed, Amara continued to lead the charge, organizing protests, lobbying for systemic change, and ensuring that the fight for justice remained at the forefront of every conversation. Her resolve was unshakable, and with every victory, no matter how small, she felt the weight of the past slowly lift from her shoulders. They had fought for this moment, and now they would make sure that no one would ever be forced to endure the same suffering again. The sun was setting behind the community center, casting long shadows over the streets that had once been abandoned, now filled with life. Laughter echoed from the open windows, the sound of children playing, and the hum of community members working together. What had once been a forgotten corner of the city had transformed into a place of hope, and at the center of it all stood the legacy of the people who had fought for this moment. Amara walked through the gates of the community center, her heart swelling with pride as she surveyed the work that had been done. The walls were painted in bright colors, a symbol of the renewed spirit that now defined this place. She had never imagined that she would see the day when her mother's name would be honored like this, not in her wildest dreams. The center, now named after her mother, stood as a beacon of what could be achieved when people united for a common cause. The community had come together in a way that no one thought was possible. What had once been a place of pain, where families had been torn apart by the Whitmore legacy, had now become a symbol of resilience. The road had been long, and the scars of the past would never disappear completely. But the people of this community had built something stronger, a future. Amara stepped up to the podium at the front of the center, where a large crowd had gathered. They were here to celebrate the grand opening, but also to remember everything that had brought them to this point. There were speeches, music, and an outpouring of love and support that had taken root in the very soil of this place. People from all walks of life, who had once been strangers or adversaries, now stood side by side, united by their shared history and their vision for a better future. Gregory Whitmore stood near the back of the crowd, his gaze fixed on Amara. He had come a long way since his family's empire had come crashing down. His role in the fight for justice had once been tenuous, but now he was a vital part of this community's rebuilding process. He had renounced his claim to the Whitmore fortune, redirecting his resources into the very heart of this transformation. As Amara began to speak, her voice carrying through the crowd. Gregory couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude and awe. He had watched Amara fight tirelessly for justice, and now he was witnessing the fruits of her labor. Amara's voice was steady, but there was an emotion there, a deep well of gratitude and sorrow. Today we stand here not as victims of the past, but as survivors who have built a new future, she said, her words ringing out. We stand here as a community that has refused to be defined by the sins of those who came before us. My mother used to say that hope is the one thing that can never be taken from you. It's something that only you can give away. Today, we have all chosen to give hope to each other, and in doing so, we've created a legacy of change. The crowd erupted in applause, and Amara paused, her heart full, as she looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family. They had been through so much together, and now they were stronger than ever. Gregory approached the podium after her speech, his expression one of quiet determination. This center is not just a building, he said, his voice carrying through the microphone. It's a testament to what can be accomplished when we choose to fight for what's right, when we stand together, and when we choose to heal. I know that I will never be able to undo the damage that my family caused, but I can help build a future that will never again suffer the same fate. I am committed to supporting this community for as long as it takes, because this is where my heart belongs now. His words were met with a round of applause, but Amara could see the deeper impact they had on the crowd. Gregory's willingness to stand with them, to publicly acknowledge his role in the past and his commitment to the future, was the final step in securing the community's faith in their new vision. It wasn't just about what had been taken away from them. It was about what they were now building together. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration. The community center, now a vibrant hub of activity, was filled with people sharing stories, laughing and dancing. Amara and Gregory stood together in the midst of it all, feeling a sense of peace they had never thought possible. They had come so far, and though the road ahead would be challenging, they knew that the foundation they had laid was unshakable. As the night drew to a close, Amara found herself standing outside, gazing up at the stars. The weight of everything that had transpired still hung heavy on her heart, but there was something different now. There was a sense of finality in the air, as though this chapter of their lives was coming to a close. And yet she knew that it wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Gregory walked up beside her, his gaze following hers to the sky. I never thought I'd see the day when this would happen, he said quietly. When the Whitmore name would be erased, and something better would take its place. Amara smiled, a small, knowing smile. Sometimes, the past has to be torn down before you can build something new. And sometimes, you have to fight harder than you ever thought you could. Gregory nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I'll stand with you in whatever comes next. Together, we've created something powerful. Amara placed her hand on his arm, her grip firm but gentle. We've created a legacy of hope, of justice, and of healing. And it's one that will last long after we're gone. Gregory met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his own redemption. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future they were building together. As Amara looked at the community around her, she knew that they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had taken the darkness of the past and transformed it into a light that would guide them forward. And with every step they took, they would ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The air was crisp that morning, and there was a palpable sense of excitement hanging in the atmosphere of the community center. It was a day of change, A new beginning for so many who had been scarred by the horrors of the past. Yet, the scars were no longer just remnants of trauma, but symbols of resilience. Amara stood in front of the podium, her heart racing with anticipation. It was her turn to speak now, the final chapter of this journey. As she prepared to address the crowd, her mind wandered back to all that had led her here. The pain, the battles, the victories, and the many moments of doubt. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the future they were shaping together, the future that was finally within their grasp. A soft murmur ran through the crowd as Amara stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the faces that had once been strangers, adversaries, or victims, but were now her partners in this movement. There was Gregory, standing off to the side, watching her intently. His presence was a steadying force, a reminder of everything they had fought for and everything they had overcome. Together, they had led the charge to expose the truth, to stand against the Whitmore legacy, and to build something that would endure. But today wasn't just about their shared fight. It was about the community's fight. It was about the people who had refused to be broken, the ones who had rallied behind Amara's cause, who had believed in justice even when it seemed impossible. Today marks the beginning of a new era. Amara's voice rang out, steady and strong. The crowd quieted, hanging on her every word. A new era where we, the people, reclaim our future. A future built on the ideals of justice, equality, and unity. It's been a long and painful journey, but we are here now, standing together, ready to face the future, with our heads held high. Her words echoed through the room, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. All that mattered was the present, and the knowledge that this community had reclaimed its power. Amara's journey had been marked by darkness, but it had also been defined by her unyielding determination. She had fought for justice not just for herself, but for the countless others whose lives had been upended by the Whitmore family's greed. She had uncovered the truth, exposed the corruption, and helped to dismantle an empire built on exploitation. But perhaps the greatest victory of all was the community they had built in its place. Behind her, a massive mural adorned the wall of the community center, depicting the faces of those who had fought for this change. It was a tribute to the individuals who had sacrificed everything for the greater good, a reminder that justice wasn't just a concept. It was a living, breathing force, carried forward by those who refused to let the past define them. Together, we have built something more powerful than any fortune, more enduring than any legacy, Amara continued. We've built a future where no one has to suffer in silence, where no one is forgotten, where no one is left behind. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the crowd once more, landing on Gregory. There was no need for words between them. His silent nod was all the acknowledgement she needed. They had been through so much together, and now they were standing side by side, as equals, bound by their shared mission. Gregory stepped forward when Amara finished speaking, his voice calm but resolute. I've spent my whole life living in the shadow of my family's legacy. For so long, I didn't know who I was beyond the Whitmore name. But now, standing here with all of you, I realize that the only legacy worth carrying is the one we create together. The crowd erupted in applause, and Amara felt a rush of emotion sweep over her. This was it. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for, the justice they had fought for, the future they had dreamed of. It was no longer just a dream. It was their reality. Gregory turned to face the crowd, his hands clasped behind his back. My family's legacy is gone, but the work we've done here, the work we've done together, will never be erased. The truth has set us free, and now it's our turn to shape the future, to ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated. The message was clear. Today was a day of reckoning, a day when the people of this community reclaimed what had been stolen from them. But it was also a day of hope, a day when they set their sights on the future, ready to build a world that was better for the generations to come. After the speeches had ended, after the final round of applause had died down, Amara found herself alone in the quiet of the community center. She stood by the mural once again, her fingers lightly tracing the painted faces, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over her. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments when it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders, when the fight seemed impossible. But every step, every sacrifice, had led her to this moment. And as she gazed at the faces of the people who had stood by her, she knew that they had accomplished something far greater than they had ever imagined. The journey had been painful, but it had also been one of profound transformation. Amara thought about her mother, about the pain she had endured, and about the many lives that had been shattered by the Whitmore family's greed. But as the tears welled up in her eyes, she wiped them away, knowing that her mother would have been proud of what they had achieved. Gregory walked over to her, his presence a comforting one. "You did it," he said softly. "You made all of this possible." Amara smiled, her eyes meeting his. "We did it. All of us. We fought for justice, and now we've created a future that's ours to build." Gregory nodded, his expression filled with a quiet understanding. "The fight's not over, but this is our moment, and it's just the beginning." The days that followed were filled with progress. Amara continued to lead the charge, working alongside Gregory and the community to bring about meaningful change. The community center became a hub for social action, a place where people could come together, share their stories, and organize for a better future. As the community grew stronger, Amara found herself looking toward the future with a renewed sense of purpose. There was still much work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. The fight for justice had transformed her life, and it had transformed the lives of everyone around her. Gregory, too, found himself growing into a new role. No longer defined by the sins of his family, he became a champion for social change, using his resources to support the rebuilding of neighborhoods, to fund education, and to provide opportunities for those who had once been left behind. Together, Amara and Gregory worked to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be forgotten, but that the future would be one of hope, equality, and opportunity for all. As the years passed, the community flourished. New businesses opened, schools were built, and families that had once been displaced found new homes. The legacy of the Whitmore family was nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale of what happens when greed and power go unchecked. And in its place stood a vibrant, thriving community, united by a shared vision of justice. Amara, standing at the helm of the foundation, named after her mother, continued to mentor others, to inspire the next generation of leaders. She had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of the power of perseverance and the importance of never giving up. The legacy they had created together would live on for generations to come, and the future, once uncertain, was now theirs to shape. As Amara stood there, looking at the vibrant community that had been built through struggle, sacrifice, and determination, she knew one thing for sure. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. This journey, full of twists and turns, challenges and triumphs, is a testament to what happens when we choose to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. The people of this community, once shattered by greed, now stand as a united front, ready to shape a brighter future. But just like the characters in this story, our journey together is far from finished. And you, yes, you are a part of it. Your voice, your support, and your engagement can help us continue to move forward, to continue telling these stories that matter, that inspire, and that demand change. So, if you've felt a spark of hope, if this story has made you reflect on your own journey or your own fight for justice, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Share your experiences. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next chapter of this incredible journey. There's so much more to come, and together, we can make sure the future is brighter for all. Thank you for being part of this story, and I'll see you in the next one.